Ah yes, the humble kids game show. One of the staples of any kid's 90s nostalgic television. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a top 10 countdown of what I suppose were my favourite kids game shows of that time. And this is just my opinion. If you don't agree with it, fair enough. But I'm running down on a list of which ones left the biggest impression on me. So I'm going to start the countdown and we'll see where it goes.
Number 10. It is Run the Risk from CBBC. What do you get in a 90s Saturday morning? On Going Live or Live and Kicking? Well, you get rave music, white trainers, bright outfits, Peter Simon, Shane Ritchie, Peter Simon, lots and lots of gunge, and of course Peter Simon falling into lots and lots of gunge. Run the Risk was a loud and fast-paced show that occupied about 20 minutes of the morning time slot. And essentially, it was all about these kids who would go on, answer questions, get messy, and win lots of prizes. Definitely a good way to start off your Saturday, although I do believe it was also shown during the weekdays as well. At number 9 on the countdown, it is Nightmare. Now I suppose some people might think this is a bit low on the list, considering how much of a cult favourite this show is. Having said that though, I was only 6 at the time, so half the time I was pretty bored, and the other half of the time I was absolutely loving it. Of course the show would get a bit scary sometimes, but that's what the sort of simplistic graphics could do to a kid back then. Heck, back in the day, the graphics that were used in this show were actually very advanced and cutting edge at the time, and it also paved the way for many other virtual reality based shows of the 90s to go about their business. Of course, the highlights included Traeger the Dungeon Master, and his often rather witty dialogue, and of course whenever a contestant would bite the dust, he would be all like, "Ooh, nasty." Still definitely a favourite, and they even repeated it on Challenge TV about 10 years after it ended. At number 8, it is Terror Towers on CITV, a spooky-themed game show hosted by Steve Johnson and his puppet sidekick Boris the Spider. It was set in a spooky castle, and it had 2 teams, green and red, later green and orange, performing a series of tasks in order to win eyeballs. Yep, they used eyeballs as a method of scoring. Ugh. Anyway, there were several different rooms in the house with various tasks. There was one room with walls that would close in on you, one room which would tilt about, and one which was a tower with an industrial fan at the bottom, which was later taken out. I don't know why, but, well, it certainly suffered because of that. The final game was set in somewhere called the Stinky Sink, where the contestants would have to take out these rather gungy-looking bones and put some skeleton back together again. It was certainly one of my favourite kid shows of the time, and clips of it are very hard to find on YouTube these days. But if you can find any clips, I do suggest you check it out. It was pretty cool. Number 7. To Me To You. Now, in the 90s, Chucklevision was one of my favourite shows on CBBC, and when the Chuckle Brothers started hosting this game show, of course, I just had to watch it. And it's actually quite a decent game show when you give it a little bit of thought here. It's basically based around what used to be a large board game, where the Chuckle Brothers would aid 2 teams in collecting coconuts to win prizes, and also win all other kinds of prizes, and play a series of games. These included such things as the Chuckle Challenge, the Celebrity Challenge, and of course the very, very staple of the show, the Chuckle Chuck, where the Chuckle Brothers would have custard pies flung at them. It was bright, it was colourful, it was cheerful. Pretty much the opposite of what Terror Towers was actually, come to think of it. At number 6, it is Incredible Games. And yes, I know this is the comic relief version, but getting copies of the ordinary version on YouTube was something that proved to be quite impossible. But never mind. This show was basically based around the Crystal Maze formula, where the players would play a series of different games in order to collect credits so they could fly up through this fictional skyscraper and go through the roof. One of the best things about this show was the lift, the host of the show. In the first series, he was hosted by Little Britain's David Walliams. He was funny, he was cheerful, and he had all kinds of amazing banter to have with the contestants. The Lift was replaced by a different actor in Series 2, and he's not as good, because he sounds more functional and phoned in, and just doesn't have the same sort of endearing charm as David did. And of course, you can't forget the scary part of the show, which was with the Dark Knight. No, not that Dark Knight, this Dark Knight. Of course, I found him so scary I would be cowering behind a sofa in a different part of the house. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, and I'm probably not the only person that did that either. But even scarier still, the Dark Knight was actually played by Simon Shelton, who would later go on to play Tinky Winky in the Teletubbies. The best game of the whole lot, though, was the ever-popular Alphabet Soup, where contestants would take magnetised letters from a giant soup bowl and try and make words out of them. It only lasted for 2 seasons though, and well, it's a bit of a pity really. I think it could have gone on a bit further. At number 5, it is Jungle Run. Now this one did come quite late in my childhood, however it was still endearing enough for it to get a mention here. The games and locations were all set around this synthetic jungle, which was used in Keith Chegwin's Naked Jungle, but let's not go there. It was actually one of those sorts of shows where these contestants would sort of go on a big jungle expedition and try and collect bananas in order to earn time inside the jungle temple in order to get the treasured golden monkey. They later replaced the bananas with monkey statues, and this probably was actually an improvement in terms of adding a bit of mystique to the show. But I think the overall level of gameplay did sort of suffer as a result as the series progressed. Although back at that time I had already grown out of it anyway, since I was already pretty much into high school at this point. The show had 3 different presenters throughout its 7-year run, starting off with Dominic Wood. He was later replaced by Chris Jarvis, and both these hosts were bright and energetic and definitely looked like they were enjoying their parts respectively. The third presenter of the show was Michael Underwood. He was a good choice, but he didn't seem to have quite that same edge as the other two did. The show's antagonists were a couple of monkeys called Sid and Elvis, who were genuinely more annoying than funny, and they would basically go and annoy the teams around all these various locations, such as an abandoned camp, a tomb, and a bunch of raging rapids. The show was starting to look a bit tired in its later series, but all the same it was still endearing enough to last for several seasons, and I think that garners a merit. Number 4. Probably the most insane game show ever created for kids television. It is Crazy Cottage. This entire game was done backwards. It started off with round 5 and finished at round 1, and a lot of the other things, including the point scoring system, was even done backwards. So basically the team with the lowest number of points would actually be considered the winner. Very weird. It was hosted by 2 different hosts, Jez Edwards and Rick Adams respectively, although I think perhaps the late great Mark Spate could have been suited to this show as well, had he not been making named that tune at the time. There was also a cuckoo called Vera who often mentioned several different weird jokes and everything, and it was another staple of just how crazy kids TV was getting at the time. But I still enjoyed it, and that's why it deserves a mention in my top 10. Number 3. Funhouse, a whole lot of fun with prizes to be won. That was what the theme tune said, and it said that throughout the show's entire 10-year-long run. Throughout the 10 years it was hosted by Pat Sharp, coming complete with his mullet, and also a couple of twins, Melanie and Martina, who acted as cheerleaders and support for each of the teams. Some of the staples of this show included all these messy games full of gunja plenty, and the Fun Kart Grand Prix, which was set with 3 laps around the studio, but the biggest and most best thing about this show was the funhouse itself. Every kid of my age group dreamt of getting into this funhouse, and with all the prizes that were to be won inside, you could just see why. Some of my favourite parts of it included the flying fox and the bobsled, although sometimes I was a bit disappointed when my favourite parts of the funhouse would not get used. I also liked the little touches that were added, such as the animation of the rooster cawing whenever somebody picked up the power prize. It was still a great show for its time, and another one of those American imports that seemed to catch on a lot better in the UK than it did where it came from. And speaking of American imports, here's another one at number 2. This time it is Finders Keepers, the classic room raiding game show of the 1990s, hosted by the irreplaceable Neil Buchanan. He's perhaps best known for hosting Art Attack, among other shows, but Finders Keepers was definitely one of those ones which I really enjoyed tuning into because he was a lot of fun in this, and it was also one of those shows where you could just see a whole house getting trashed and you wouldn't have to worry about who cleaned it up. The question and answer round was also good fun, and Neil Buchanan certainly looked like he was having a lot of fun with the wrong answers always getting shown through the garage doors. In 2006, the show actually got a revival, which is unusual for a lot of these game shows from the 90s. They didn't mess about with the formula too much, but unfortunately they did change the presenter to Jeff Brazier. Whilst I don't have anything personal against the guy, I don't like the fact that he seems to be just going through the motions and is not really that interested in what he's doing, whereas Neil Buchanan at least enjoyed what he was doing and seemed to become as much of a staple of the show as pretty much everything else. But still, this definitely warrants a place on my top 10, and that's why it's at number 2, providing you do not count the ill-fated 2006 revival. And at number 1 on my countdown, it is Get Your Own Back. Now, every kid back in the 90s, if they lived in the United Kingdom, wanted to get their own back on some grown-up killjoy by dipping them in the infamous Gunk Dunk tank. Dave Benson Phillips was on hand to help them do that, and some grown-up killjoy, such as a parent, teacher or older sibling, would be on the receiving end of this sort of punishment. You can tell that Dave loves his role in this show, so much so that he stayed there throughout the show's entire 12-year duration. Yes, 12 years, a testament just to how popular this show was in its native United Kingdom. 2 teams would compete against each other, and whichever kid got the highest points would get to do what they wanted by dipping the grown-up in the Gunge Dunk tank. They also risked getting covered in gunge themselves on some occasions, which also added a little bit to the flair of the show. There was a fantastic variety of games, and the decor of the first few series was based around that of an old-fashioned fun fair, so it was certainly within its element. From 1997 onwards until the show's ending in 2003, they had a slicker and more futuristic sort of setup. I wasn't so keen on this whole sort of decor at that time, but it still looked pretty awesome, and I definitely think it helped add more to the show's appeal as well. So, that was my list of top 10 game shows of my childhood. So that was my list of my top 10 game shows from my childhood. I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching.